Our guest, Kevin Matthews, he's an assistant professor of history at George Mason University. And Kevin, I want to start with you because you were on this broadcast back in October and you had a great line. You said that Brexit is sort of like the Eagles song, Hotel California. You can check out, but you can never leave. We're about a half hour away, maybe even less. It looks like leaving is actually going to happen. Well, we got to have a new song, I suppose.
Well, Boris Johnson might think he's leaving the EU, but he's not really. He's just beginning the phase of the transition, going into talks. And those will start at the end of February, and he thinks they're going to be done by the end of December, but virtually no one else does.
And Nathan, you brought along a little prop here.
My British passport. Feeling a little lighter this evening, I can tell you.
So what do you make of this?
I think Kevin's quite right. As Winston Churchill once said, it's not the beginning of the end, but the end of the beginning when it comes to the relationship with Europe. And there is a big trade deal to be negotiated with the EU, but that is everything. The relationship with the EU defines what's going to happen with the US and the UK. It's going to define what happens with China and the UK. So, you know, it's a bit like the mafia. Every time you think you're out, they pull you back in, right? and this has actually been the UK's relationship, and you know, I'm a student of history, with the European continent for hundreds, if not thousands of years, that you have this love-hate, schizophrenic relationship where one moment you're in, one moment you're out. The British Empire, yes, but Napoleon's trying to control the continent. Let's get in. Same with Nazi Germany. But you can date this back hundreds and hundreds of years. And there is still this sort of schizophrenic attitude in the British Isles and elsewhere in Northern Europe too. You know, we could talk about the Scandinavian countries, about continental Europe. So a lot of people are focusing on the last 3 years, and I understand that. But it's also to do with geography, culture, and everything else as well.
Kevin, it's so interesting because this whole vote was pretty simple, in or out. But it's complicated, and we're talking about that with the exit, the transition period. Trade deals generally take years to hammer out, and it's a lot of back and forth. Now they're kind of, there's vice grips involved here. This has to be kind of negotiated in a short period of time.
Yeah, that was the problem, and David Cameron, when he proposed this referendum, never really thought it through, and the Brexiters never really thought it through. Donald Tusk, the then president of the EU Commission, said after the 2016 referendum that there should be a special place in hell reserved for those who proposed this referendum because they didn't have any idea what they would do afterwards. I don't think the Brexiteers ever really thought they were going to win that referendum. And so now they've had to play it on the hoof. It is significant that the EU has been readying for this for months. They held seminars with 200 diplomats to begin their negotiations starting at the end of February, beginning of March. And it looks as if Boris Johnson is going to send a contingent of maybe 30 to Brussels to negotiate. So they're already starting from a very weak position. And they never thought that the EU would hold together the way they did. They thought at first they could separate the 27, and what they found to their surprise in London is that they all stuck together.
Yeah, I talked about Donald Tusk. Let's talk about the other Donald that you cover on a daily basis, Donald Trump. And he's been a big cheerleader, a supporter of this. But he's not a great guy to negotiate with either. And if he feels like he's got all the cards, so talk to me about working out a trade deal with the United States.
Yeah, can I just go back a bit? Because remember the previous president, Barack Obama, I know it feels like 20 years ago, but he was criticized when he said, you know, if the UK left the European Union, they would have to get to the back of the queue, see the English word, not line, for a trade deal. And everyone thought that basically David Cameron, the Prime Minister, then had put that word into Obama's mouth to sort of discourage this idea of voting leave. Now it's completely the opposite. In fact, I have never seen a US president, perhaps outside of wartime, weigh in on domestic issues in the United Kingdom like Donald Trump. And if you look at his close advisors like Stephen Bannon early on, they were essentially trying, not just in the UK, but in Italy, in Greece and elsewhere, to essentially destroy the European Union from within. That's essentially what people have been saying. Now, I'm not saying the US did that with the UK, but there was definitely a cheerleader on the other side of the Atlantic. But it's delivery time now for Donald Trump, because if you say, leave, it's so much better if you're outside, we'll have a free trade agreement, but then you start saying, don't deal with Huawei, eat our chlorinated chicken, New York's going to be the center of the financial universe, that's not going to fit well with the British people.
Kevin, to that point, we heard one of the guests from London say that the UK now entering a big, tough world, and Boris Johnson also trying to prepare the folks in the UK for this, saying, admittedly, there will be bumps in the road. So talk about those bumps in the road. I mean, he's alluded to it, you have as well. How difficult is it going to be to navigate this terrain? And to Nathan's point, you don't want to alienate China because you want as many friends as possible now because you're out there alone, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a number of factors that Boris Johnson's going to have to take into consideration when he goes into trade talks, not just with the EU, but with Donald Trump and also with China. But I think that if the British think that they're somehow going to replace the trade that they've had with the EU, with the United States, and with China, they're living in a fantasy world. Something like 53% of the UK imports come from the EU. 58% of the UK exports go to the EU. Now compare that with the United States. Only 13% of the UK's exports go to the US, and the UK only imports 14%. When it comes to China, very quickly, when it comes to China's UK exports to China, they're only between 3.5% to 5%. You can't make up those numbers. They just don't add up.
Kevin's got such a great point here, because I'm not going to give away my age, but essentially the entire time the UK has been in the European Union has been my life. And what's happened, it's not just economic, it's cultural. We all go on vacation in France, in Spain, people buying second homes in Estonia, can you believe it, in Poland. So what's really happened is a cultural integration. So you've also got this huge affinity for each other's products, people moving from Poland to the UK. So what's happened is, as well as the big stuff like cars and aeroplanes, which is spread over Europe by European policy. So what's essentially happened is you have this codependent relationship. It's a marriage, albeit with 28 countries, 27 today. And this is totally underestimated by the British public. It's not because they're stupid or it's because they're ill-informed. Because the entire debate over leaving the EU, and we've heard our colleagues in London talk about, you know, take back control and how wonderful that was in terms of selling Brexit, but it didn't educate the public of what's next. And your figures put that into perspective, that basically half of your exports and half of your imports come from this bloc you are leaving. It is a divorce. And when you divorce, you have to give up half the house, right?
Or the whole house.
Oh, the whole house
gets
and the kids.
Yeah.
And, you know, and you go through all your stuff. That's what's happening right now.
Yeah.
And you've also got both sides laying down markers. They say they want to have smooth negotiations, but already today Michael Gove was saying that when it comes to things like fishery rights, the UK is going to claim up to 200 miles of ocean around the UK. Well, the UK between Calais and Dover is only 21 miles. So is he going to claim fishing rights up to Paris? I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
And this is so silly too. Can I tell you, I did a podcast the other day with someone for our heat show, and he was saying like fishing is like 0.1% of the entire economy, but it's the symbolism, you know, it's our sea, it's our fish. And this is where the problem lies. Nationalism takes over from empiricism, which is essentially saying what's good for us, what is good for everyone else. You know, Chinese like to use the phrase win-win. Everyone's lose-lose here.